I've described AF as a giant, kind of a super GPS that helps you find things. So let's get used to the user interface to navigate through this AF asset database. The primary user interface is through something called the Pi System Explorer. That's available through Start Menu. You should find it under Program Files, All Programs, Pi System, called the Pi System Explorer. Used to be called the AF Explorer, but it's now the Pi System Explorer. And there's, well, this is your primary interface. Let's just kind of go through it and look see what's available. First of all, of course, it's got a menu bar. This is a Windows application, so there's all kinds of nice stuff on here. We'll talk more about importing and exporting from XML files into a database. And then later on, we'll talk about searching through elements using this little search that you see over here. And as you can imagine, other things, some fundamentals like setting up your options, generic options for AF in general. That's all available from within here. The different views you can turn on and off, going to specific elements, etc. So that's all in the menu bar, and it behaves just like any menu bar you'd imagine. Now, the real interest, I think, comes in when you start looking at this browser. This pane right here, the one that's currently labeled Elements, and that's actually very important. Currently, it's labeled Elements. It might be labeled something else soon, depending on what you've chosen down here. Anyway, this browser is what we use to drill down through the tree structure in AF. So in this case, we've got this thing called OSIsoft Enterprises. It's a sample training database. And through this OSIsoft Enterprises, we can drill down to find things within a specific division or geographically, things that we might be interested in. Now, in this case, let's say I'm a process engineer in manufacturing. Now, I know we do more than just manufacturing with people, IT resources, etc., etc. Hey, let's just pay a little homage to the history. We started out in manufacturing. So let's say I am interested in a reactor and all the things about that reactor I might want to know. So I will go to a division that I'm real familiar with by drilling down to division, to the chemicals division. And I know that I'm in Houston, so I can right away ignore these other two. I'll drill down to Houston. I'm going to look for this tank. Now, how I find this reactor, how I find the reactor really kind of depends on who I am. If I'm an E&I technician, an electrical instrumentation person, I may just want to navigate this by looking at an equipment list. I can drill down through here and say, okay, here's all the things, flow meters, heat exchangers, pumps, reactors, etc. It's very useful for me to look at that as an instrument technician because they're all the same to me. It's just, they have certain attributes like the manufacturer, when they were installed, etc. And that's how I like to find them. Now, compare that to somebody who is in production. He's in Houston, but he is not going to look at this as a simple list. He's going to look at it from the point of view of how the process actually flows. So under production, you'll notice that, well, anybody in production knows that you start at the mixing room, and there's different components. There's a pump, there's tanks, etc. in the mixing room, and then that all squishes over into the production line. And from that, within that production line, we find two different trains, a preheat train and a reactor train. And lo and behold, no big surprise if you're in manufacturing, the reactor train is where you would find the reactors. So as you can see, there's just two different ways in this case of navigating to the exact same object, the exact same asset. This is called Houston Reactor 101. Hey, that was the same thing we saw up here. If we go into our equipment list, reactors, Houston Reactor 101. Same thing. So that's how the browser pane works. Now, there's a couple of other things about this browser, like, for example, if you were to, let's say you've got a brand new reactor. Of course, that doesn't happen every day, but let's say you've added a brand new reactor. Then at the top of this reactor train, you can do a right mouse click here and say, let's do a new child element, and you can add a new element, a new reactor. That's probably going to be based on a template called a chemical reactor, etc. And you can add that underneath what are your existing reactors. We'll talk more about that and demonstrate more about creating elements later on. Now, there's a lot I'm leaving out right now because I'm just interested in talking about navigation. We'll talk about the attributes, etc., to to these assets a little bit later on. We'll go into those in a lot more detail. But that's how the navigation works, and that's what this browser allows you to do, to navigate. And also this is where you would go when you wanted to create new elements. It's one of the ways you can do it. Now, the browser pane, as I mentioned, is, in this case, it's showing me these elements. It's labeled elements. It's only showing me that because that's what I've selected down here in what is known as the Navigator panel. The Navigator panel allows us to choose what it is we're currently navigating. So, for example, if I were interested in the library objects that exist on AF here, I would just click on Library, and now my browser is going to browse through these library objects. Now, we're not going to cover this in this class, but we also have a mechanism called event frames for looking at batch-oriented things, and we are going to look at units of measure later on. So you can see units of measure. Now we're navigating or browsing through those units of measure. So that's the navigation, or excuse me, the Navigator panel. Now, when you select an object from this browser here, like I'll go ahead and select that reactor again, reactor 101. When you select it, well, we obviously need some mechanism to show you what's in there, to view what's in there, and that's what this is all about. This is called the viewer panel, or viewer pane. So within this viewer section, you can find out everything you want to know about that asset. So we know, for example, it is called reactor 101. It is based on a template called chemical reactor. And let's see if it has any child elements. I'm guessing no, and that's correct. It has no child elements. However, child elements are simply elements within elements. So, for example, reactor train, as you can see, has these as child elements, the ones underneath that in the tree structure. But reactor 101 doesn't. Now, in addition, this viewer pane has other tabs like attributes, ports, versions, etc. We're going to cover all those later on. Let's just concentrate though. This general, child, etc. These are just different windows onto that asset. So the assets can have any of the things that you see here, and we'll discuss those in more detail later on. Now, I kind of omitted something here, one of the more important things, and that is from the Edit menu, there's an option called Search Elements. It's actually the same thing that you see over here when you choose to search. And this search is controlled by some options that are set with this little drop down right here. One of the things I'm going to do so I can get some actual results is to include the children. I guess you would do that with care, depending on whether you're looking at something that may have millions and millions of elements or not. So, you know, we turn that off by default, so it's not going to take off on a search that might take an awful long time. Actually, I shouldn't say that. Our current scaling or scalability is such that we are supporting millions and millions of elements. So to be honest, I'm not sure what kind of results you'll get if you search for millions. But in any case, the default is that it will not include children. So I went ahead and turned that on. And what I'll look for now, let's take a look. I'll go from the very top of the hierarchy here. OSIsoft Enterprises, again, including children. And let's look for that reactor 101. So there's a couple of ways I can do this. I can look for HOU for Houston. And I can find everything that has that in it. There we go. Now that shows up here in the view. This is the search results. It also shows up in a place you might not expect it, and I'll be honest, this surprised me. It shows up over here in your browser. So in the browser window, you will now see not underneath, but just kind of at the same level as your main hierarchy here, you will see those search results. And each time you do another search, we're going to stack another set of search results over here. So don't let that surprise you. I know it surprised me. Let me show you another example. I'll search for, I think it was Houston Reactor 101, right? Yeah, I know for a fact, I think, well, let's test. I think this is the only Reactor 101 we're going to see. So if I search for Reactor 101, I'll go ahead and choose search. It looks like there are three, one in Houston, one in San Leandro, and one in Montreal. So, but as you can see, what we're doing is we're simply going through the entire hierarchy here and finding those things that match. And as I mentioned also, you'll see these things show up. These quick searches are showing up over here on your viewer as well. So you can go back and revisit searches that you did earlier. And when you want to delete those, you can just do a right click and delete. We'll just warn you we're about to delete it. And then those are deleted. I haven't seen anybody do this, but be careful you don't delete this. This actually will delete your database. We do give you a different error message. Hey, you know, all references are going to be deleted. No. So yeah, that search, you know, if I were to do a search and delete that, that's no problem. If I were to accidentally delete this, that would be a problem. So watch out for that. Now, in addition to that search, we also have an advanced search. So this brings up a new dialog box, and from here, what I can do is exploit some of the features like the category, the categories that are available within these assets. All the assets that you create, all the elements, can be assigned to certain categories. There's only one category here. Let me just make sure this. Remember the children elements? We've referred to them here as sub-elements. But if I search for everything that matches that category, there we go. You notice everything that in the category head now shows up. Or I could search, instead of that, I can search for things just based on a certain template. So I'll search just for all my chemical reactors. Do a quick search. It found 12 results. I'll go ahead and select them all. And when I click on OK, now we've added that to this browser window. So if I want to look at my asset called Houston Reactor 101, there is that reactor again.